All right, real quick, just rapid fire, see if you can nail these. Tinker, right? What year was that?
There's definitely something different about being in that classroom.
The first news story.
We have this pool of great talent. We have photographers, graphic designers, artists, writers.
Just the environment of so many people that are there for the same goal.
It kind of makes you feel like you're doing something that matters.
Or you could do it on the feature. Don't be afraid to try something.
This is a student-led newspaper, and obviously we represent the school, but also it seems as if we're an independent organization.
We can go and do some real journalism.
If you've interviewed somebody, you're watching every single word that you're saying. If you say the wrong thing, someone's going to get mad. If you don't say it the right way, somebody's going to get mad.
From earlier in the issue, if like there's a similar topic, it's not just about how pretty it looks. It's definitely about important stories and giving the students who don't always have the opportunity to speak, giving them that opportunity. I'm Annie Hayes, and I'm the editor-in-chief of The Pylon.
Well, here we are in 2019, and besides the traditional print newspaper and print yearbook, we have live on Twitter, Instagram, these student media operations.
A teenager with the press, with the pencil, with an interview process, with a recorder where they get exactly what you said, that's a scary, scary situation for most adults.
You know, one of our goals, surely with education, is to train strong journalists, but also strong citizens.
What I love about what I see my own students doing is that they get it. What they're doing is real. It makes a difference, and that it can also have real negative impacts on people if they aren't objective. I can't imagine trying to teach without the protections offered by the Kansas Student Publications Act.
The legislation helps clarify that you cannot restrain coverage or content simply because it is controversial.
You can't be obscene. You can't invade someone's privacy. You can't be libelous. You can't disrupt the school process. If it passes all of that, everything else is a decision. Do you want to publish this enough to take the feedback that may come? The administrator says, I don't have control.
The recent coverage at Salina Central High School is emblematic of why we have this legislation. People understand that a free and responsible student press should be protected within the state.
Yeah, that's sad. My name is Marie Gutierrez, and last year on staff was my first year as a reporter, and it was also the first year that I was the copy editor for my entire staff. Kind of have that set aside and go.
Sitting at the table as we discuss stories and plan out the next issue of The Pylon, it's a great environment because people are bouncing ideas off one another.
It was right after we had gotten back from summer break. One of the topics that we had talked about is what we did over the break.
This story was about a book called Water for Elephants, which was assigned to sophomores for their summer reading.
Students had read the novel and were interested in discussing it and sparking conversation about it, so it got on the list.
Should we be allowed to read this as sophomores? And so we decided to do a little bit of digging and talk to a couple of the teachers and see if it was really all it was cracked up to be.
There were a couple scenes in the book that may have involved sex.
Like, sex is a sensitive subject, especially when you're dealing with high school students. Just hearing some of the excerpts that were from the novel, like adults might get upset that we're talking about it. Are we ready for this kind of talk?
The novel isn't about sex. It's a very good novel. We wanted to bring to light how important the literature was. We did decide to take an excerpt from the novel that involved one of the controversial scenes, and teachers were upset and parents were upset because they didn't want that particular content in The Pylon.
I was very concerned the entire time that the heat we got would end up kind of exploding in and kind of destroying the pylon. Maybe it was just a fear of mine as being a rookie reporter, but it was a very real fear at the time, and it kind of just kept me up.
I would say for me, but that's a little weird. I'm going to say with me and law quiz.
So early on in the journalism program at Central, we learn about what you can and can't do with the law.
What we start with in my beginning journalism class is here's the First Amendment. Here's what it protects you from.
I had the basic idea of the Constitution saying freedom of press. I wasn't sure how I would be affected, though, as a student because I was still a minor and I didn't know about the Student Publications Act.
It's very important for the students to have the Kansas Student Publications Act because it does give them real-world experience. It does empower them and protects them and gives them a voice. And I think it also teaches them the responsibility that, just because you have this protection, you can't treat it lightly.
It was not, it never has been, a blank check to let students do whatever they want to do. This legislation helps people understand that controversy can be a part of journalism and it should be protected. But the coverage still needs to be within the framework of responsibility. The controversial coverage that those students undertook for the betterment of their school. That's what's so beautiful about this process. They saw injustice. They saw their rights and their responsibilities, and they wanted to address that. And the legislation, 25 years later, gave them the framework and the support to do that job. The Kansas Student Publications Act came about as a very direct response to the Hazelwood decision. The Supreme Court Hazelwood versus Kuhlmeyer case in 1988 transformed the landscape of high school journalism in America. It essentially said that school newspapers were under the control of the school administration, that an administrator like the one in St. Louis upon which the case was based could just arbitrarily censor anything that might be deemed controversial.
Trying to teach journalism with an absence of First Amendment protections is ridiculous.
It sent shockwaves across the nation amongst high school advisors and journalists, and particularly here in Kansas.
Pretty much immediately, a group began to gather from the Kansas Scholastic Press Association to address what we felt was just a miscarriage of the judicial system. We really felt like this was wrong.
We were up against some other entities that were not supportive of it. The School Administrators Association was not supportive of it.
A lot of people who argued against the bill, I don't think they ever read the whole thing. And we didn't realize it till it had already gone down in flames, and it was just pigeonholed quietly. And that was devastating.
Working on the legislation the second go-round, we found a sponsor, State Senator Lana Olien, a Republican from Manhattan, and Lana is a former high school English teacher. So with all of that background, she understood how journalism worked. She's a former teacher. She understood what we were trying to do. She was a Republican, so she could work with the majority. She was a moderate, so she could work with the minority. She was just in that middle ground, and she was extremely respected. So when we were able to secure her as a sponsor, she could guide us on what we needed to do to help other folks understand the benefit of the legislation.
My students testified all 3 times that we went before the various committees in the House and the Senate. I was so proud of these kids because they were so excited, and what they had to say they were so passionate about. The kids are called up one by one, and the coolest thing was that they did listen. They actually looked up when the kids began to speak, and some of them, you saw them get engaged in what the kids had to say, and that was just amazing.
One of the huge turning points in this process, we had a student journalist from Northeast Kansas who was scheduled to testify, and this student didn't show. We found out during the course of the testimony, the reason she was not there was because her principal would not allow her to testify. Okay, what does that mean? You know, it's an honor to testify, to be called to the legislature, to do your job as a citizen, and yet this principal refused even to allow her to have that First Amendment privilege. That was a game changer for us. It clearly showed the power that administrations have over student journalists and how they could intimidate them. As it worked its way through the House and then the Senate, I remember us so tensely counting votes. You sat in the gallery and you put marks on yay and nay, just hoping and praying for a positive outcome. And it was such a relief to finally reach that point after 4 years. Once the legislation was passed, the next step, of course, was the governor's signature, who turned out to be very supportive of it.
We were thrilled when it was signed.
What this legislation fortunately was able to do was to help folks understand how strong high school journalism works and what its benefits are.
The moment that we kind of realized that this was going to actually be a story in the pylon, it was kind of towards the end of it, right as I kind of finished the first draft of it. And I was reading back over my work and I was thinking, okay, this is actually not that bad. It wasn't the topic that I was concerned about. It was just a matter of, am I presenting this topic in the best way I can? It was kind of something that teachers weren't entirely sure if they wanted us to read as students, especially as sophomores.
You know, then I had colleagues who were like dear friends of mine. Kind of started to feel that maybe there were some of my friends that were bothered that I was allowing this to be covered. That was a little bit of a scary moment.
One of the teachers that was very against us running the article, she came in and spoke to us about why she did not want that included. That was a little hard. We voiced our side. We said, although we do see where you're coming from, we thought that covering controversies is what needs to happen. It's important that we voice the students' opinions, and we just went ahead and told her, we are going to run this story. It's very important to us and important to the student body. Having that moment of leadership felt very important to me.
Hearing Annie kind of say that, it was kind of just like, it was a moment where I just felt really proud of her, and because not only was she standing up for herself, she was also just standing up for our staff in general.
Okay, so I stood there and watched a student who had been almost raised with this idea of the Kansas Student Publications Act helping her and allowing her to cover these subjects. And I was just overwhelmed with the pride, like, wow, she's nailing it. She's standing up for herself and standing up for the publication, and that was one of the more proud days I had as an advisor.
It was definitely a turning point in the pylon where we decided that we want to cover the hard stories. We knew we were protected because of the Student Publications Act. We couldn't be blocked by a principal or teacher from publishing what the students believed and what we believed should be published.
Release day is always an exciting day.
When we receive the papers on print day and we get to see what the accumulated work of everyone in the classroom has amounted to.
So obviously today is different.
You don't really know what the reaction's gonna be.
That one makes me nervous.
Students walking through the halls and got their nose in the pages of the pylon, going through and reading our student work.
All right, I think this one's
There's gonna be people out there that either love what you do or they're gonna hate what you do.
So Kansas Student Publications Act.
When Water for Elephants, the story finally got published, I felt really proud of what I had done. It was the first article that I had ever written for the newspaper, and seeing that people were reading it and seeing that people actually liked it, or maybe even didn't like it, just seeing that something I had done was in print and that I was proud of it, it just made me feel alive.
Pick out weird things that we don't even know. Standing up for myself and for our publication was huge. It was very empowering and relit the fire for how much I love journalism.
Think about which stories deserve.
We should continue to empower young journalists because this next generation it's got something special.
The knowledge that the kids want to get it right. That's my proudest thing about being a journalism teacher.
This is when high school did not feel
Frustrating, and there are some points where you just kind of want to throw up your hands and say, I'm done. But it's important to just keep going.
If you need anything copy edited, please.
And when these situations present themselves, on which side of the law do you want to be? The side that says students have freedom, or on the side that says I'm going to restrain you?
We're changing this society and our citizens to be people that are going to talk about tough things. I'm passionate about that.